Hey folks, welcome back to Auto Freaks. Today we'll be reviewing the Proton Suprima S. Maybe a game changer for Proton. We'll see. Hey folks, welcome back to Auto Freaks. Today we've got the Proton Suprima S. Now, Proton has been around for about 20 years, more than 20 years actually, and I personally have owned about 7 of them, all the way from the Saga to the Pradana. And while I personally think my favorite Proton has always been the Satria GTI, which I had in 1998, this is the car that's a game changer for Proton. And I'll tell you why. This is the first Proton that's actually at par, or so they would like to think, with the Vios, with the City, possibly even a Civic. But is it? That's the thing. Now, this is a car that has been done by Proton from the ground up. It's got Lotus ride and handling. It's got a pretty decent engine, which we'll get to in a little while. It's got a CVT gearbox. It's very quiet. It's very nice to drive. But there's something lacking, and this is something that has always been a problem with Proton. The plastics. They're all over the place. The plastics in this car are ridiculous. You know, it's just, I cannot begin to mention how much plastic there is in this car, and it's not even nice plastic. It could be a little bit better plastic, because let's face it, there's a lot of plastic in cars these days. They recycle cars, you know, 70% up to sometimes cars can be recycled because of the plastics. But the ones in this car just don't feel right. But let's get back to that later. What we have here is the Suprima S. It's got a turbo engine, it's fully equipped, it's got start-stop with a little button on the side there. It's got an infotainment system that can be paired up with Bluetooth. All the creature comforts that you could possibly want are in this car. It's got cruise control. It's even got those repeaters that will repeat a few times if you just touch the button. But unlike other cars which only repeat 3 times, this one does it 5 times, which is okay, pretty cool. Apart from that, this is the car that's going to go up against the likes of, like I mentioned earlier, the Vios, the City, because it's priced that way. It's actually priced in that bracket, which is a pretty gutsy move for Proton, which has pretty much always been producing rather cheap cars. So one of the things about Proton is that people have always said it's cheap, and maybe that's why people buy a Proton, because it's cheap. And let's face it, yes, comparatively, they are pretty cheap. But that's the difference between other Protons and this one. The Suprima S doesn't feel cheap. It actually feels pretty good. The cabin insulation is amazing. The noise, vibration and harshness has been kept to a minimum. And one of the biggest complaints that people had with Protons was of course the power windows. Now check this out. Seems to be working just fine. One touch up, one touch down. Very easy to use. Unlike the Waja that I used to have, where the power window buttons were about like that big, these feel a lot better. Overall, the drive feels really good. The steering mounted controls are easy to use. Unfortunately, they're not very well placed because they are right at the position where I like to put my thumbs, on the 9 and the 3. Some people like to put their hands on the 10 and 2, but you know, I like to rest my thumbs here. And I find myself muting the stereo, changing the stations, unintentionally of course, every time I make a turn, like what I'm doing right now. But there's cruise control, there's keyless entry, there's a push start stop button, there's an infotainment system that you can pair up with your phone and Bluetooth, you name it, it's got it. The air conditioning is amazingly good, as with all Protons. Ask anybody about the best thing about a Proton, air conditioning. This one is exactly the same. Climate control, it'll freeze you. So thus far, it has been quite a pleasurable drive. Now let's go and talk about the engine a little bit. Back at you. Hey folks, welcome back. So here today we've got the Proton Suprima S. Let's take a look at the engine. This is Proton's CFE engine. It's turbocharged. It puts out about 140 bhp, 205 Newton meters of torque. It will do the 0 to 100 sprint in 9.9 seconds and top out at 190 kilometers an hour. It is mated to a 7-speed CVT gearbox, which is pretty quiet. Now these are rather impressive performance figures for a Proton. Let's take a look. So this is Proton's CFE turbocharged engine. It's pegged as a 1.6, although it's 1561cc. It'll do 0 to 100 in 9 seconds, it'll top out at 190 kilometers an hour because it's got 138 brake horsepower and 205 Newton meters of torque. It's a front-wheel driven car, and the engine is mated to a 7-speed CVT gearbox. Now these are rather impressive figures for a Proton. So there you have it folks, the Proton Suprima S. It's a really good effort from Proton. They still have a ways to go. There were some things we didn't like about the car, but by and large, it's a really good effort. So if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and give us some comments as well.